Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth, with your host, the Green Bard. This is episode 6-15 of the Direwolves of Winterfell, Red Light and a Mistrustful Shadow, covering Jon and Ghost's bond through the middle section of A Dance with Dragons, especially relating to some important interactions with Melisandre. A Dance with Dragons, Jon 4. In the next scene, Devon Seaworth is accosted by Ghost. It is at first unclear why Ghost would do this. Devon seems a nice enough lad. Upon further inspection, though, there are a couple clues. First, Devon is clearly terrified of Ghost, even before Ghost starts threatening him. Perhaps the boy has heard the rumors of Jon being a warg as well, adding to that fear. Then, in real life, boys of that age who show fear in front of dogs are prime candidates to be attacked. So perhaps George R. R. Martin is riffing on that concept here? Most importantly, though, the stewards, chiefly Bowen Marsh, are already disillusioned with Jon's leadership, specifically the food situation. My opinion is that this general unrest and anger must have Ghost's sense of danger peaking, the main reason for him showing his own anger. Later, Ghost attempts to shadow Jon, which fits that explanation, but Jon commands him to stay. Instead, he runs off. Perhaps he went to sniff out the source of danger? Either way, his disobedience and protective/aggressive behavior are reminiscent of Grey Wind in A Storm of Swords, which is of course worrisome. Jon's choice to separate himself from the wolf is also foreshadowing bad things for Jon's future. By the time they returned to the surface, the shadows of the afternoon were growing long. Clouds streaked the sky like tattered banners, gray and white and torn. The yard outside the armory was empty, but inside Jon found the king's squire awaiting him. Devon was a skinny lad of some 12 years, brown of hair and eye. They found him frozen by the forge, hardly daring to move as Ghost stiffed him up and down. "He won't hurt you," Jon said, but the boy flinched at the sound of his voice, and that sudden motion made the direwolf bare his teeth. "No," Jon said. "Ghost, leave him be. Away." The wolf slunk back to his oxbone. Silence on 4 feet. Devon looked pale as Ghost, his face damp with perspiration. My lord, his grace commands your presence." Later that chapter. If it would please his grace, he followed the young squire back across the yard. Ghost padded after them until Jon said, "No, stay." Instead, the direwolf ran off. A Dance with Dragons, Jon 5. In this chapter, Jon declines his tale, but keeps Ghost with him as he goes about the castle. Jon refusing or underestimating his need of protection becomes a theme in this volume, dovetailing with the undercurrent of dissatisfaction in his leadership among the brothers, led by Marsh. This is only exacerbated when he returns from the sojourn in Molestown, with more wildlings to join them on the wall. Jon washed and dressed and left the armory, stopping in the yard outside just long enough to say a few words of encouragement to Hop Robin and Ebbett's other charges. He declined Ty's offer of a tale, as usual. He would have men enough about him if it came to blood. 2 more would hardly matter. He did take Longclaw, though, and Ghost followed at his heels. A Dance with Dragons, Jon 6. Jon again has no tale, but is shadowed by Ghost when we see them next. Actually, Jon was without Ghost earlier in the chapter. I assume Jon had had a wolf dream and knew the wolf was off ranging the wood, even though we don't get the dream in the POV. In the scene that follows, we get a very vivid mind meld between the two when Jon makes physical contact with Ghost. Jon's senses of hearing and smell are suddenly augmented tenfold, but we are distracted from this by the appearance of Melisandre, who smells warm. Though more vivid, this is reminiscent of the time that Sansa made physical contact with the cat Balerion, that same cat that Arya caught and chased in A Game of Thrones, in which Tommen calls the bad cat in A Dance with Dragons, which as a kitten was possibly skin-changed by the Princess Rhaenys and may be the vessel for her second life. He found Ghost outside his door, gnawing on the bone of an ox to get at the marrow. "When did you get back?" The direwolf got to his feet, abandoning the bone to come padding after Jon. Later that chapter. "No, I just need a breath of air." Jon stepped out into the night. The sky was full of stars, and the wind was gusting along the wall. Even the moon looked cold. There were goosebumps all across its face. Then the first gust caught him, slicing through the layers of wool and leather to set his teeth to chattering. He stalked across the yard, into the teeth of that wind. His coat flapped loudly from his shoulders. Ghost came after. Where am I going? What am I doing? Castle Black was still and silent, its halls and towers dark. My seat, Jon reflected. My hall. My home. My command. A ruin. In the shadows of the wall, the direwolf brushed up against his fingers. For half a heartbeat, the night came alive with 1,000 smells, and Jon Snow heard the crackle of the crust breaking on a patch of old snow. Someone was behind him, he realized suddenly. Someone who smelled warm as a summer day. The subsequent interaction with Melisandre virtually proves my earlier suspicions that third parties can invade Ghost's mind and affect his actions. It starts relatively normally with her asking to pet him. She calls him in a sing-song voice, and he comes to her warily, but after he smells her fingers, he nuzzles her hand. That is when everything changes. I think the author means for us to wonder about the change in Ghost and what caused it. Did she affect him with her voice, her scent, her mind, or was it the physical contact, as in the prior passage? Either way, I believe she's also using skin changer magic in this instance. I'd suggest that when they made physical contact, Ghost's and Mel's minds melded in a warging fashion, overpowering the wolf's connection with Jon. To support my hypothesis, I need only to look earlier in the chapter when Jon touched Ghost. The author set it up extremely well. Jon's senses are nearly overwhelmed when he makes physical contact with Ghost. In turn, Ghost's connection to Jon was probably overwhelmed when the magically powerful Melisandre made contact with Ghost. In effect, Melisandre temporarily blocked the bond between Jon and Ghost. Ghost completely ignores Jon when called forward, and looked at him as if he were a stranger. This must have been a punch in the gut to Jon, who already doubted his own ability as a warg. He was in disbelief. Nonetheless, if measured against her aim to influence Jon's behavior, her display is ineffectual. She tries to get Jon to embrace his identity as a warg, but he mentally resists, thinking, I am not a wolf. Then she offers to help him, but does it in such a creepy way that he is instead repulsed. She also misuses her control over Ghost, draping her arm over him almost possessively. This probably makes Jon feel threatened. There is also in this passage another comparison between Ghost and Melisandre's eyes, and her ruby, evoking Rhaegar. To me, this is more symbolism that suggests Ghost is magically special, like a greenseer. Further, Jon mentions Ghost's eyes as being blazing at times, like Mel's. We have noticed that this typically accompanies determination or anger in the wolves. This is also the case with humans in this work. In Melisandre, I'd interpret the same to be an indication of her religious zeal. She is single-minded and imperturbable, but I am not sure that is a good thing. With Ghost, it is. For you are bastard born, I had not forgotten. I have seen your sister in my fires, fleeing from this marriage they have made for her, coming here, to you, a girl in grey, on a dying horse. I have seen it plain as day. It has not happened yet, but it will. She gazed at Ghost. May I touch your wolf? The thought made Jon uneasy. Best not. He will not harm me. You call him Ghost, yes? Yes, but... Ghost? Melisandre made the word a song. The direwolf padded toward her. Wary, he stalked about her in a circle, sniffing. When she held out her hand, he smelt that too, then shoved his nose against her fingers. Jon let out a white breath. He is not always so. Warm? Warmth calls to warmth, Jon Snow. Her eyes were 2 red stars, shining in the dark. At her throat, her ruby gleamed, a third eye glowing brighter than the others. Jon had seen Ghost's eyes blazing red the same way, when they caught the light just right. Ghost, he called, to me. The direwolf looked at him as if he were a stranger. Jon frowned in disbelief. That's queer. You think so? She knelt and scratched Ghost behind his ear. Your wall is a queer place, but there is power here, if you will use it. Power in you, and in this beast. You resist it, and that is your mistake. Embrace it. Use it. I am not a wolf, he thought. And how would I do that? I can show you. Melisandre draped one slender arm over Ghost, and the direwolf licked her face. The Lord of Light, in his wisdom, made us male and female, 2 parts of a greater whole. In our joining there is power, power to make life, power to make light, power to cast shadows. Shadows? The world seemed darker when he said it. To me, that passage is clear, incontrovertible proof that Ghost can be manipulated telepathically by those who are magically strong. Ghost disobeying and acting as if he doesn't know Jon is what you might call a smoking gun. It also makes our earlier assertions and speculations about third-party meddling with Ghost feel that much more plausible. A Dance with Dragons, Melisandre 1. Melisandre is the POV for our next scene with Jon and Ghost. We learn many things from her in this chapter, the first and most powerful of which is her vision, where she sees Jon as a man, then as a wolf, then as a man again. After that, she sees danger to him from enemies, daggers in the dark. The latter vision clearly predicting his death in A Dance with Dragons, Jon 13, while the former relates to what happens after his death, namely that the man goes into his wolf to begin his second life. Mel also thinks that he becomes a man again, and this seems to foreshadow his resurrection, that Jon goes back into his body from Ghosts. I believe that we are quickly gathering the facts that are key to understanding the mystery of how that is possible. The flames crackled softly, and in their crackling she heard the whispered name Jon Snow. His long face floated before her, limed in tongues of red and orange, appearing and disappearing again, a shadow half seen behind a fluttering curtain. Now he was a man, now a wolf, now a man again. But the skulls were here as well. The skulls were all around him. Melisandre had seen his danger before, had tried to warn the boy of it. Enemies all around him, daggers in the dark. He would not listen. Next, we have another potential instance of meddling in Ghost's actions, when Jon is surveying the heads of the 3 murdered rangers, men he sent himself. Ghost sniffs the spears and then pisses on them. Jon decides that Ghost decided they couldn't be tracked. You know nothing, Jon Snow. What Ghost really did was make sure that hounds couldn't be used to track the wildling murderers that delivered the heads on spikes. Given our proof from the prior chapter of the ability to meddle in Ghost's actions, I am very suspicious of Ghost's actions here, but it's clear that Ghost took the decision out of Jon's hands, possibly at the behest of some puppet master. It is, of course, possible that Ghost sensed danger and acted alone to protect Jon. To believe this, we'd have to believe that he acted alone and on purpose when he outed his location to the boys who were chasing him the night he tried to desert as well, for instance. Conversely, I am not sure if I am ready to ascribe that amount of intelligence to Ghost yet. No, said Jon Snow. They left their gifts in the black of night, then ran. His huge white direwolf prowled around the shafts, sniffing, then lifted his leg and pissed on the spear that held the head of Black Jack Bulwer. Ghost would have their scent if they were still out there. Regardless of potential meddling, I suppose that we can take solace from the fact that Ghost is in place as Jon's protector in this scene. Unfortunately, that changes as they go back through the wall to Castle Black, where Jon chooses to send the shadowing Ghost away with Ed. As they walked beneath the wall, she slipped her arm through his. Morgan and Meryl went before them. Ghost came prowling at their heels. The priestess did not speak, but she slowed her pace deliberately, and when she walked, the ice began to drip. He will not fail to notice that. Later that chapter. Lord Snow, Melisandre said quietly, will you come with me to the king's tower? I have more to share with you. He looked at her face for a long moment with those cold gray eyes of his. His right hand closed, opened, closed again. As you wish. Ed, take Ghost back to my chambers. Why send him away, Jon? Hasn't she given you enough reason to keep your wolf close? A Dance with Dragons, Jon 7. This chapter is very dense with symbolism and direwolf interaction. It starts with Ghost being a wolf. It's interesting how he loves fresh fallen snow. One might assume that this is about grooming. The freshest snow might be best for cleaning his fur. Or is there something symbolic about this? I wonder if this scene is an analog to the cleansing that Dany experienced in her second dragon dream, cleansing by fire. Obviously seen here now in the opposite, ice. Jon decides to take Ghost north of the wall to swear in the new recruits. A good choice, considering the prior visit to that same weirwood grove. The two journeys are very much paralleled up to and including the fact that 2 bodies are found and brought back in each journey. Again, Ghost goes off as they near the forest, presumed to be hunting, but he may sense danger and is investigating it. He seemed to smell something. At the base of the wall, he found Ghost rolling in a snowbank. The big direwolf seemed to love fresh snow. When he saw Jon, he bounded back onto his feet and shook himself off. Dolorous Ed said, "He's going with you?" "He is." Later that chapter. "I have something they did not." Jon turned his head and whistled. "Ghost, to me." The direwolf shook the snow from his back and trotted to Jon's side. The rangers parted to let him through, though one mare whinnied and shied away till Rory gave her reins a sharp tug. "The wall is yours, Lord Bowen." He shook his horse by the bridle and walked him to the gate and the icy tunnel that snaked beneath the wall. Beyond the ice, the trees stood tall and silent, huddled in the thick white cloaks. Ghost stalked beside Jon's horse as the rangers and recruits formed up, then stopped and sniffed, his breath frosting in the air. "What is it?" Jon asked. "Is someone there?" The woods were empty as far as he could see, but that was not very far. Ghost bounded toward the trees, slipped between two white-cloaked pines, and vanished in a cloud of snow. He wants to hunt, but what? Jon did not fear for the direwolf so much as for any wildlings he might encounter. A white wolf in a white wood, silent as a shadow. They will never know he's coming. He knew better than to go chasing him. Ghost would return when he wanted to, and not before. Jon had also smartly sent out scouts, as Tom Barleycorn seems to have ridden ahead. Jon smelled him, then clearly recognized that it was actually Ghost's sense of smell he was using, and it was happening a lot. This is the strongest waking instance of the mind meld between Ghost and Jon, without them being in physical contact. Clearly the bond is still strengthening. As they enter the glade to encircle the wildlings, Ghost is shadowing Jon to make sure he is safe in the confrontation. Jon again noticed Ghost's weirwood symbolism, too. Jon smelled Tom Barleycorn before he saw him. Or was it Ghost who smelled him? Of late, Jon Snow sometimes felt as if he and the direwolf were one, even awake. The great white wolf appeared first, shaking off the snow. A few moments later, Tom was there. "Wildlings," he told Jon, softly, "in the grove." Later that chapter. Ahead he glimpsed a pale white trunk that could only be a weirwood, crowned with a head of dark red leaves. Jon Snow reached back and pulled a longclaw from his sheath. He looked to the right and left, gave Satin and Horse a nod, watched them pass it on to the men beyond. They rushed the grove together, kicking through drifts of old snow, with no sound but their breathing. Ghost ran with them, a white shadow at Jon's side. The weirwoods rose in a circle around the edges of the clearing. There were 9, all roughly the same age and size. Each one had a face carved into it, and no faces were alike. Some were smiling, some were screaming, some were shouting at him. In the deepening glow, their eyes looked black. But in daylight, they would be blood red, Jon knew. Eyes like Ghost's. Speaking of, Jon and Ghost make physical contact twice in the next scene. First, he holds the wolf back as they play it safe with One the giant. There is nothing special about this interaction, save for Ghost's obedience, but the second time is more intimate. Ghost nuzzles Jon, and the man drapes his arm over the wolf in a very similar fashion to Melisandre's scene with Ghost not long ago. This time he seems to share Ghost's sense of smell and sight, and I think he even shares Ghost's thoughts. All he saw was men. He no longer thinks of the wildlings as enemies, as he had done for most of A Storm of Swords. This concept of empathy for and identification with the free folk seems to be something that Ghost helped him to fully realize, as well as Ygritte, of course, and to a smaller extent, Mance, Tormund, and Corran. This empathy is also why his brothers are working steadfastly toward his downfall. Unfortunately, he didn't learn the basic leadership skill of communication with your men for the sake of fostering understanding to naturally raise morale. He wouldn't have learned the skill from Mormont, who was also killed by his men, but he should have learned it from Ned. Throughout this volume, all his entreaties that the wildlings were men, as he sees so clearly through Ghost's eyes, were always given to his deputies only. These deputies disagreed with Jon and would never have shared Jon's views with their underlings. And Jon never made the case for common cause with the wildlings directly to his men. It made for terrible morale and set the stage for the bloodbath that probably follows his own death. Ghost showed his teeth in answer. Jon grabbed the wolf by the scruff of the neck. "We want no battle here. His men could bring the giant down, he knew, but not without cost. Once blood was shed, the wildlings would join the fray. Most or all would die here, and some of his own brothers too. Later that chapter. "I am the sword in the darkness," said the six, and it seemed to Jon as though their voices were changing, growing stronger, more certain. "I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men." The shield that guards the realms of men. Ghost nuzzled up against his shoulder, and Jon draped an arm around him. He could smell horses' unwashed breeches, the sweet scent satin combed into his beard, the rank sharp smell of fear, the giant's overpowering musk. He could hear the beating of his own heart. When he looked across the grove at the woman with her child, the two graybeards, and the hornfoot man with his maned feet, all he saw was men. Clearly, from the last interaction with Ghost, we can conclude that Jon is getting very close to being able to fully Warg Ghost. And with that, we'll conclude this episode. I look forward to next time. Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video. Songs of love, her bell light ring in the window, but lies should see. Thanks especially to those of my family who helped in this series so far. The shade of the walls so high. It's so lonely. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.